Hi, Tara here with Chapter 12 of The Bridge to Belle Island. Let's get started. Mr. Adair is definitely hiding something, but we don't know what yet. After Miss Lawrence and Mr. Adair departed, Benjamin remained in the study. He sat at the desk, files open and pages spread before him. Eyes soon growing weary, he donned the spectacles he often wore for reading. He came across an architect's plan for the house, and on it identified the location of the wine cellar. He considered searching it himself, although he doubted there was any point. Miss Wilder had made no secret of where the remaining bottles were, and both she and Mr. Adair had mentioned drinking some of the orange wine, to no lasting harm. Even if she were guilty, it seemed highly unlikely that she would have poisoned more than the 2 bottles she'd sent to Mr. Norris. Might he find some evidence of that act down there? He supposed it was possible. Perhaps he should just ask Miss Wilder to show him the cellar. He doubted she would refuse to do so, knowing it would only make her appear suspicious. Some time later, Miss Wilder knocked on the door frame. She did not look pleased. "May I interrupt?" "Of course." Benjamin removed his spectacles and sat back in the chair. She stepped inside. "Rose told me the news. I wish you would have told me first, instead of interrogating my young niece without me present." Chagrin washed over him. "I did try to find you, but Adair told me you and Miss Medina had gone out." "Only to the boathouse." "Then perhaps I should have waited. Forgive me. Mr. Adair joined us, if that eases your mind." "Unfortunately, it does not." She took a deep breath and began. "Mr. Booker, my niece would never hurt Uncle Percy or anyone else. This is the girl who captured spiders and released them out of doors instead of smashing them to bits as most people do. She has a quick tongue, I'll allow, and often speaks without thinking, but that just shows you it is not in her nature to dissemble. No, she did not always get on with Uncle Percy, but she liked him more than I ever did. He was her legal guardian, after all, and they spent a great deal of time together in London. Yes, he irritated her when he refused her requests for this folderol or that, but what young girl enjoys being refused anything? She would not have liked her parents denying her whims either, had they lived." Miss Wilder paused to catch her breath, then continued. "If anyone had something against Percival Norris, it was me, for it was my island he was threatening with his talk of shipyards and boat builders and leases and profits. Remember I sent him that angry letter?" Benjamin was surprised she would raise that topic on her own. She must be desperate indeed to protect her niece. "I did not read the letter myself, but Mr. Hardy told me about it." "Then he probably told you what I wrote." Benjamin hedged. "Not in detail, though he mentioned its threatening nature." "I was upset. I told Percy to desist or I would engage my own lawyer and have him removed as trustee. It was probably a foolish threat, for Percival once hinted that if I tried anything like that he would testify that I was not of sound mind, and unable to manage my own affairs." "On what grounds?" A mirthless chuckle escaped her. "On the grounds that I have refused to leave this island for any reason." "Being reclusive does not make one insane." "He called it some sort of female hysteria." Miss Wilder began pacing across the room. "I had to do something. I hated feeling so powerless about my own home, my own fate." Was she mad? Suffering from hysteria? Benjamin didn't think so, but he was no expert. Nor, considering his own episodes, was he in any position to judge. "A court case would have been drawn out, publicly embarrassing and expensive. You can see why someone might suspect you of deciding it would be easier to kill him." She gaped at him and slowly shook her head. "You astound me. What sort of world do you live in where killing someone is the easier option? Every life is precious, even that of someone we don't like. I could never do it." Testing her reaction, he asked, "Would you show me the wine cellar?" "Of course," she replied, with no sign of distress. "Any time you like." He drummed his fingers on the desk and changed tack. Let's talk about the day of the betrothal party in London. What about it? I already told you I was not there for it. Tell me what you did instead. Was it just an ordinary day for you? She sketched a small shrug. No, it started out ordinarily enough, but then I recalled what day it was and the party. That made me think ahead to Rose's wedding and fear that I shall miss that as well. I know I should not borrow trouble, but in practice it is difficult not to worry. I understand. I tend to be a worrier myself. How often my poor mamma tried to encourage me as a boy, reminding me not to worry, but to pray instead. At the time it vexed me. Now, whenever I grow anxious, those words from Philippians 4 go through my mind and put things in perspective. Perhaps I should learn those myself, she sighed. At all events, on that day I felt as low as I have since the deaths of my parents and sister. I was unable to attend to anything, not the baskets or my responsibilities, not my favorite books or my other friends. They shared small smiles at that. Then she walked to the window and stared out as she continued. Dr. Grant came to check on me mid-afternoon and did his best to comfort me and keep me company. We sat out in the boathouse for hours, the doors flung wide, looking at the water. The river usually soothes me. As a rule, I do not overindulge, but I confess, low as I was, I did drink rather a lot of orange wine that day, hoping it would ease the pain. Ironically, yet unsurprisingly, the cure left me with a stabbing headache the next morning, or should I say afternoon, as I slept embarrassingly late. Did you stay in the boathouse all night? I went to bed at some point, though it's all a bit foggy. I apparently fell asleep out there, and Dr. Grant had to help me inside. Did he share the wine? No, he never has a drop. Religious conviction? She shook her head. He simply saw its effects on too many patients and determined to have nothing to do with the stuff. Probably wise. Tentatively, Benjamin asked, You don't worry people will talk about you and the doctor being out together all night? Fear your reputation will be ruined? As I said, that day did not represent my usual behavior. But no, I don't worry over much about what people think about Teddy and me, nor of my reputation, not at my age. Besides, there were not many people on the island to see us. The Weavers returned to their homes by late afternoon. Abel Curtis and the other tenants were no doubt already tucked into their own cottages for the evening, and the servants were probably either too busy to notice or in their beds, for they rise early. And Miss Medina? Did she not remain awake to help you undress for bed? His foolish neck heated to say the innocent words. Why must he find her so attractive? She usually does, but when she came to the boathouse to look in on me that afternoon, I told her I wanted no dinner and not to wait up for me. I said I would see her in the morning. I didn't want her to stay up late on my account. Miss Wilder looked off and thought, I vaguely remember Dr. Grant helping me to my bedchamber. Goodness, how scandalous that sounds. But I promise you, in my state, there is absolutely nothing romantic about the situation. Perspective change. Isabel glanced over and noticed Theodore Grant hovering beyond the threshold, his face grim as he looked from her to Mr. Booker. She wished she'd thought to close the study door. Isabel, may I speak to you a moment? It's important. Oh, of course. If you will excuse me, Mr. Booker. Isabel rose and joined Teddy in the corridor. Taking her arm, he led her down the passage and hissed, Why are you answering his questions? You needn't, you know. He cannot compel you. He has no authority. He is trying to help discover the identity of Percival's killer, and although Uncle Percy and I did not see eye to eye and I was not fond of him, he was still a human being and a relation. He deserves justice. That is why I am answering Mr. Booker's questions. Even if you end up implicating yourself or someone you love? Isabel's heart twisted. What are you saying? How could I? He shut his eyes and ran a hand through his hair. Just be careful, Isabel. That man is poking into a hornet's nest, and I don't want you to be to get stung. Long after Teddy had left the house, his words remained, running over and over again through Isabel's mind. What had he meant? By answering Mr. Booker's questions, had she somehow put Rose in jeopardy? Or Teddy himself? Yes, she might implicate Rose if she told Mr. Booker her niece had delivered the wine to London, and therefore had ample opportunity to poison it had she wanted to. His suspicion would certainly increase, especially as Rose had avoided mentioning that detail. But really it proved nothing. The wine could have been tampered with after it reached London. And what about Teddy? Was he worried his professional reputation would suffer if people found out they'd been alone together most of the night? Or was he worried about something else entirely? Had he something against Percival Norris too? Unbeknownst to her, had Percy refused his consent to Teddy as he had to Evan? She wanted to know the truth, but wasn't keen on being stung by it. Who else might Teddy have meant by someone you love, now that most of her family were gone? Of course she loved Arminda and Lottie, but surely neither of them had been involved. Isabel doubted he would include Evan Curtis in that number, even if he wondered how she felt about her former beau. Isabel went to her bedchamber and closed the door behind her. She didn't know how soon Lottie would return, but was glad for a few minutes of privacy. She crossed the room and pulled a small box from the bottom of her dressing chest. In it were several pieces of memorabilia from her younger days. A brittle fan of her mother's, a few letters from her brother when he'd been away at sea, her father's small copy of the New Testament and Psalms, a hand-sewn needle case given to her by Arminda, and a silk scarf of her sister's. Beneath this, she found the items she was looking for. First, a tin star. Second, a river rock, worn smooth by the current of years, and unmistakably heart-shaped. Isabel stroked the glossy surface, and remembered Evan pressing it into her hand, his fingers lingering, caressing the sensitive skin of her palm. I will put a ring on this hand one day, but for now this will have to do. You hold my heart in your hands, Isabel Wilder. Take care what you do with it. The recollection brought a stab of guilt. Finally, she picked up the shriveled bud of a dog rose, complete with stem and prickle, a wild climbing variety with hooked thorns. When given to a lover, it meant pleasure mixed with pain. The thorn pricked her finger even now, all these years later, and a tiny mound of blood dotted her skin. Pleasure and pain. That certainly described her memories of Evan Curtis. Perspective change. Benjamin thought about going back to the stables to look under the tarpaulins, but through the window saw Miss Wilder's lady's maid out on the veranda, and decided to talk to her instead. She sat on the sofa with a heap of blue material on her lap and a basket beside her. He walked outside and said, "Good afternoon, Miss Medina. I like your sewing room." She lowered her needle and thread. "Glad you approve." Miss Isabel tore her hem dancing, and since it is such an unseasonably warm day, I decided to work out here. Ah, my fault, I'm afraid. He took a step closer. May I ask you a few questions while you work? If you'd like. She moved the dress out of the way to make room for him. He sat down and turned to her. After hearing you sing, it is clear you are a woman of remarkable talent. Thank you. How long have you lived here? Nearly 7 years. And before that? I performed as an actress and singer for several London theatres. Had you worked in that profession for long? My whole life. My grandparents managed a theatre. My mother made costumes, and I grew up backstage. Medina, is that a Spanish name? Si, she replied with a sly grin. My father was Ferdinand Vega Mardina, an actor. He married my mother, but soon strayed, leaving her for some young dancer. After my grandparents died, it was just Mama and me. How did you come to work on Belle Island? Miss Wilder invited me. I met her about 3 years before I came here. during one of her last trips to London, I believe. She attended one of my performances at the Theatre Royal. Afterward, she came out to the back door to congratulate me, as people sometimes do. Unfortunately, she came upon me arguing with someone. He was my benefactor at the time. I wanted to end our relationship, but he threatened to ruin my career if I did. I thought he would strike me, but he realized we had an audience, so he stormed off instead. That's when I saw her. So elegant, such posture. I knew in an instant she was a real lady, unlike me. We stood there awkwardly for a time. I braced myself, waiting for her to turn up her nose at me, to say something like, "I regret interrupting such an unsavory scene." Instead, she came near to me, eyes wide with concern, and said, "I came to congratulate you, but if there is anything I can do to help you, you need only ask. If you need somewhere to go, please let me know, any time." She handed me one of her calling cards. I kept the card, but brushed off the offer. After all, I was much in demand as a performer. I could not imagine leaving London for some remote island in Berkshire. Could not imagine needing to. For a moment the woman gazed off into her memories, but then she turned back to him. Unfortunately, my former benefactor made good on his threats to ruin me, and saw to it that I never worked in any of the better theatres again. A few years later I was down to my last few pounds, and unable to pay my rent. By that time my mother had died as well. Then another man, a dangerous man, began making my life difficult, and I realized I needed to get out of town and quickly. I dug through my many reticules until I found her calling card, went to the nearest coaching inn and bought my fare, which left me with only a few shillings to my name. I confess I came here, hoping the generous woman would remember and help me. But when I arrived, I discovered Miss Wilder was the one who needed help. Her parents and sister had died. The man she thought she'd marry had been sent far away to España. This was during La Guerra de la Independencia Española, or what you call the Peninsula War. He nodded his understanding. He had lost a childhood friend in that war. Miss Medina continued, "Miss Isabel seemed so diminished since I had last seen her. Lost. If not for little Rose, I believe she would have curled up into a ball of grief and remained there. But for her niece's sake she forced herself to go on with life, or at least her version of it, limited to the island." I have no idea if I'm doing a good Spanish accent. Sorry, Dad. She slowly shook her head. "When I learned of her losses, I felt terrible to intrude. But true to her word, she took me in. I insisted on earning my keep, so I became her companion and lady's maid." She lifted the sewing in her lap as though proof. "I had never been in service, but I knew how to sew, help people dress, and arrange hair from my years at the theatre. I learned the rest as we went. I helped her, listened to her, read to her, brushed and powdered her through the lingering grief, and we became friends. Of course, she had Miss Trulock, but as a vicar's daughter, Arminda has many duties in the parish, so she cannot come here as often as she'd like." When she stopped, Benjamin asked, "Did you not think it strange that Miss Wilder keeps herself to the island?" "Yes, I was worried for her. Miss Trulock, too. We discreetly discussed the change in her, her unwillingness to leave the island, even to go into the village or to church. But despite that, we have both done our best to support her over the years." "Dr. Grant has been a long-time friend as well, I understand." The pretty woman's face puckered. "I suppose so." Benjamin noted her reaction with interest. "You don't like the good doctor, do you?" He felt odd satisfaction at the question. She shook her head. "He doesn't like me either. But we both want to help Miss Wilder, so we tolerate one another and get on as best we can." "I see." He tucked that away for later. "And have you no plans to return to London?" "I have thought about it a time or two, but no plans at present." "Very well. Tell me what happened the night Miss Wilder fell asleep in the boathouse." "Did she not already tell you?" Yes, but I would like to hear your version of events. It will be the same as hers. That's all right. Tell me everything that happened. Miss Medina looked off and thought. Let's see. I remember Miss Wilder wanting to wear a new favorite dress that day, in honor of Rose's engagement, even though she would not be attending the dinner party in London. Despite the pretty dress, she seemed sad and subdued. Then I saw her walking down to the boathouse, a bottle in one hand and a glass in the other. Please don't think she makes a habit of drinking a lot, or alone. She rarely imbibes. I understand. Go on. I was concerned about her, truth be told, so I went out to look in on her an hour or so later. I brought her a pillow and a lap rug to keep her warm. She thanked me kindly, and said she wanted no dinner that night, and that I should return to the house and not wait up for her. She told me she planned to sit out there all evening and wouldn't be able to relax if she knew I was staying up to help her undress for bed. She insisted she would make do on her own for one night, and I could help her in the morning. As I was leaving, Dr. Grant came out and joined her. There was a second chair there, but I didn't offer to fetch him a pillow. Miss Medina paused to think, dark eyes flickering with memory. Later, after supper, I turned down her bed for her and then went to my room, and I went to sleep. Benjamin heard a slight hesitation. You did not come down again? See that she had made it to bed all right? I did not. There it was again. Benjamin had the distinct impression the woman was lying. Carlotta finished. But she was in her bed in the morning when I went in, suffering from a headache, but otherwise unharmed. Unharmed? Why should she be harmed? I only meant, well, she had a fair amount to drink the day before. Is that what Miss Medina had meant? Benjamin guessed there was more to the story than she was willing to tell. He returned to the former topic. May I ask why you dislike the doctor? I don't like the way he patronizes her, so condescending when she is far above him in many ways. I don't trust him. Benjamin felt his brows rise. Did he do something that makes you distrust him? Carlotta shook her head. He's never done anything to me, but even so, I can't like him. Why? She sent him a pointed look. Have you visited his surgery? No. Perhaps you should. Miss Wilder has not, of course. If she has, she might think differently of her old friend. I know I do. When were you there? Several months ago. I cut myself sharpening a pair of shears. She regretfully shook her head. Miss Wilder sent me to Dr. Grant's surgery. What was wrong with it? Not tidy enough for you? It was not that. I happened to look into his private office. She shuddered. Something's not right there. What do you mean? That's all I will say. Go and see it yourself. I shall. Anything else? Just this. I'd swear on my life Miss Wilder is innocent. But Benjamin had all too recently risked all, believing a pretty woman was innocent. He was not about to take this former actress's word for it now.